badly governed locally. We seem to be badly governed globally. You know, we got out of the EU, and we would like to think we're in a better place than we were, and I think that probably is true. But there's still lots of things that we need to fix, aren't there?
Yeah, I mean, the migrant issue in the Channel is one of those.
Yeah.
And we should talk about that because basically Johnson won a referendum campaign on taking back control.
Yeah.
And then he won the 2019 general election on bringing, effectively doing Brexit.
Right.
But he's got control, but he doesn't want to use it. And I've done a few interviews on the migrant crisis. And, the reality is you either have a secure border or you don't. And
we don't.
We don't. And the fundamental reason we don't is that the government doesn't want us to.
And I think more and more people are realising that,
Yeah.
because as we listen to... I had an MP on the other day called David Simmons, who actually turns out to be the chair of the Migration Committee. And he gave away the store, basically, by admitting, well, we have to do our fair share, something I've never understood. I've never taken that as a must-do. Just because France and Germany take a load of migrants. Why do we have to? What's this fair share nonsense
Well,
all
leave
about?
that aside for the moment, but just the fundamental principle, as a social democrat, I would say, does a democracy have the right to secure its borders? Does it have the right to decide who enters the country and who stays?
Yeah.
And I think we do have that right. We should have that right. And
does it also have the right to limit the numbers of people entering the country for the simple reason that administratively and just for the sake of the infrastructure of the country, there's only so many people we can actually house.
Of course, yeah, and we're up against open border zealots who think we should have no borders. I mean, a lot of people, if you go to modern universities, Mike, a lot of people are running around saying this. They don't believe in borders. But as a politician of the centre-left, I would say you need borders. The open labour market we've had has not been good for British workers.
Right.
It's put down wages and it's discouraged anyone from training. That's the issue. But just to return to the migrant issue in the Channel, we have a government that has an 80-seat majority, right? And they don't think this is an emergency.
No.
30,000 people just rock up, decide to stay. I understand they've removed 5 people, right?
So that basically, this year alone?
And if you get here, you stay, right? And that's the policy they're running. They don't regard it as an emergency. Why? Because if they did, they'd do something about it. They've got the majority. The pandemic they thought was an emergency. There's a whole slew of emergency powers they've taken.
So they think the climate is an emergency as well.
Yeah, and so the public, it's very important the public realise this. If the government doesn't do anything about it, it's because it doesn't want to.
No.
That's why. They could if they wanted, but they don't. And they've got to be held accountable for that.
Well, I think we have a problem here that Peter Hitchens talks about quite a lot, that we have a border force that doesn't want to police the borders.
Yeah.
We have a police force that doesn't want to arrest anybody, apart from for hate crime. We've got an NHS that doesn't want to treat anybody in case you might be sick and they might catch something.
Yeah.
We've got a legal system which doesn't work because the lawyers are undermining it constantly. We've got a prison system that doesn't work because we don't put people in for long enough and we let them out too soon. Almost every aspect of our civil sort of society is failing.
Yeah,
isn't it?
You mentioned the lawyers there. So in relation to the cross-channel issue, there is a solution to it, but the government isn't being honest about it. The new nationality and borders bill they're putting through doesn't remove us from, doesn't effectively deal with the problem. The fundamental problem is that we've got a series of post-war agreements, the European Convention, the 51 Refugee Convention, which were built basically in a different time. They're not suitable for what we're facing now.
Right.
Totally unsuitable. And until politicians are honest about it and say, look, we've actually, if you want to have a secure border, you've got to be out of those conventions, and you've got to decide who comes in.
Yeah.
That's basic.
Because isn't it ridiculous that we are working off something that was cooked up sort of pretty much after the Second World War, when people were quite rightly horrified by what the Nazis did to the Jewish population.
Yeah.
But it's not like that anymore. This is a very different creature that we're having to face, isn't it?
It's totally different. The demographics, and I have to say, you can't blame people. You look at the recent tragedy in the Channel. You can't blame people wanting to come here if the offer that we give them is what we give them, which is you can stay. If you get into the country and you stay, you get access to what I call the social wage. You get housed, you get medical treatment, you've got a good chance of being employed and getting a good job. It makes total sense.
Yeah.
The offer is there, and honestly, the Tories, they won't be taken seriously until they're honest about this and say you have to get out of the 51 Convention, and you have to, if anyone arrives unsolicited there has to be zero chance of them staying. Now, actually, as a policy, we think probably that there is a very good case for taking people in need in UN camps adjacent to war zones. But I'd ask you, Mike, this is the question you must ask other people. Who is more deserving, the largely fit young men that arrive and can't be removed, or families, women and children in UN camps next to war zones? Who is it?
Yeah.
And we could choose to take them, and we could vet them as well. We don't vet anyone.
No. We don't know who they are. I mean,
You've
Boris
no idea.
Johnson said at the Tory party conference this year, we ask only to know who they are.
Yeah.
And that is surely not asking too much. But the people who would seek to kind of conceal what's really going on for probably what they think are very good reasons, they're worried that people are going to become racist. They're worried that people are going to sort of rise up against migrants and going to go and sort of torch their homes and all that kind of thing. We're a very tolerant nation here.
We are.
But what we are not is willing to put up with a load of nonsense, about wool being pulled over our eyes. The MP that I spoke to the other day, David Simmons, I said to him, what happens to these people when they come? How long do they stay in these places that they get put by Serco? And do you know what he said? He said, a couple of days.
Yeah.
Which is plainly
they've
absolutely
removed 5.
wrong.
No, we don't.
But we're talking about the people who come before they're given housing. We know for a fact, and you know for a fact, that many of these hotels are booked until like the end of next year.
Of course,
because that's where they're going to be still housing people continually.
But we seem to be governed by cretins, Mike, because they don't understand incentives.
Right.
The incentive that they are giving the world is that if you get here across the Channel, which is a dangerous place, and there will be more drownings, and the drownings are on them.
I'm surprised there haven't been
I'm
more.
amazed. It's a busy shipping lane, so you can't have a system like that. Australia dealt with this system 20 years ago with the Tampa issue. We know about it, and it might sound harsh, but if you want your border under democratic control, which I think is a reason, we're not asking for very much, just under democratic control, we decide who comes here. If you want that, you have to, and people arrive unsolicited, you have to take them offshore or repatriate them immediately, and that's the end. And then you get choice, and then you might have a moral and a morally justifiable asylum system.
Yes, but of course there is something to that, and I agree with you. However, the actual practicality of it is difficult, isn't it? And that seems to be where we're struggling. Priti Patel, once again, is saying that she's going to do something. They talk about this bill that's going through. We've had a report which is published this morning, which doesn't really say anything that you wouldn't expect it to say. But when you say deport them, where do you deport them to? Do you take them back to France?
Well,
you find out what their country of origin is and take them back there?
First things first, Mike, you can't rely on the French of the EU.
No.
Because they don't. I think the animus, the post-Brexit animus, means that they don't want to help us. And actually, in reality, if you subcontract your border to the French, you're going to make a mistake. Yeah. So you could, again, I think it's entirely a matter of political will, right? You saw in the pandemic what a government can do if it wants to do it. Yeah. Okay. So if they wanted to do it, they could process people offshore. We have plenty of overseas territories ourselves that we have control of. And the big thing is, Mike, I promise you, if they did this, the flow would stop. The flow would stop. Who is going to pay 5,000 euros to get taken to Ascension Island or to South Georgia? They won't do it. No. But the government don't want to do this because they can't face the reality. They don't want to look bad in the international world. They can't face the reality that actually the apparatus that was put in after the war is not fit for purpose now. You only have to look at the demographics. You only have to look at what's happening. This flow will get bigger unless they deal with it.
Oh, it will.